So, question 2. Art conveys complex ideas, emotions, and experiences by engaging human perception and cognition beyond purely logical means. In your view, do- what determines whether a work of art is valuable or not? How do we draw the line between meaningful expression and something that lacks words? Could you provide examples to illustrate this distinction?
Right. I I I have written a whole and I've recorded a whole video on how to assess art. I think it's the problem is it needs editing. Um, uh, and so I think it's the first serious work I did in analytical measurement, analytic philosophy, in measurement art. The measurement of art was the first serious work I did in philosophy. Um, and so the way to explain this is that um, when you say what's art versus what else, if you say, well, art is an intentional means of using the evidence of the hand of man to provoke associations. Right? That's what it's doing. The evidence of the hand of man provoking associations. Now, um, and so when you study art, they'll say, well, what is it? Because art is anything man puts his hand to. Not really. There are the there for so how do I go which path do I take? But when you study art, you say what is the hand of man? Um, but in some degree, it has to do with decoration. And what is the purpose of decoration? It's essentially a nesting function. It's saying uh, this is a safe space, right? Right. And so if you start with those basic primitives, now you say, okay, well, what are the axes of measurement that we're using to accomplish this kind of work? Because we do it in all the high arts, right? We do it but we also do it in craft. So what are the dimensions of craft? Craft is materials, methods, processes, um, and how well and how complex something is determined. Now, when you talk to a squirrel, excuse me, did I just really say that as a Doolittle? When you observe a squirrel can tell the difference between the calories in the food you present to it. So can almost any animal. All right. Um, Beauty is the present, just like that. Beauty is the presence of resources for exactly the same reason. When humans look at arts, they look at the content of it the way animals and and humans look at the calories in food. It's a density piece, and so it's a work of density. So you see extremely high craftsmanship as as extraordinary expenditure to take a thing from utility to decoration to truth, excellence, and beauty. Well, what does that mean? And why do we even in the Institute bring up truth, excellence, and beauty? We do it because those are over investments in producing a commons. Does that make sense? So we're over investments in making a commons. So truth, excellence, and beauty exceed the pragmatic utility. They exceed decoration, and they actually produce a commons. So in craft, you can develop, and I think of the Japanese and the Germans as the best of this. Um, you can craft and take extraordinary care in how you bring about whatever it is you're doing as an investment in the commons, right? So that's the craft. It's basically the art of material. It's materials art, right? And the evidence of the hand of man of making an investment in a commons that is to create a safe space, where it's just, I don't like that word, but I mean, you think of it as a cave, right? If I find a cave and they're usually occupied by bears and other monstrous things, right? And we clean it out and we paint shit on the walls, we've made it ours, right? We've nested it. So it becomes a home, a safe place. And so that's the core value of what's happening. Now, let's go from craft to aesthetics. So when humans recognize certain things, certain arrangements, what we call compositions or organizations. We see the organization of whatever we're doing into a into an order that is pleasing to our senses. Part of this is an interesting collaboration. The sensitivity is a collaboration between the hand of man. I did a bunch of paintings of geometric formula in art school to make this point. Is that beautiful? Well, to me, it's beautiful, but it's order. But is it human? On the flip side, you would see like uh, I have a thing about, because of my cultural background, the English rose design series, in the Victorian English rose. So that is the evidence of the hand of nature, right? Man's application of nature. And so what you have is this spectrum, and you can go from there to just saying, I'm going to collect butterflies, right? Because they're flowers, because they're pretty, or pictures of those things. So what you're looking for when you're evaluating the aesthetics is the production of a harmony in some part of that spectrum from natural to rational, or empathic to rational. And you're looking to expose the patterns in that area in a way that are satisfying to the human. If you go into study art, you'll learn composition. Most of composition is triangles. For those of us who work with the Natural Institute, work with the method, we understand triangles are the foundation of everything. And it's basically how our cognition is organized, is ternary logic. So there are basic human perceptual boundaries that bring this up. So when I talk about that, you might not like Mark Rothko paintings, which are just big blocks of color, usually three of them, a small rectangle, a tiny rectangle, and a big rectangle, sort of like head, neck, and body, that kind of shape. But it's just big square, just an abstraction of that. And he's working with color harmonies. Now that's purely decorative, right? That's pretty. You put that on the wall. You might think, and I'm trying to stay. You might look at a Jackson Pollock, which is the guy who did all the paint drippings, right? And that might be aesthetically pleasing to you too, right? And partly because these things aren't solvable. In other words, they're not rationalizable, so they remain interesting over long periods of time because they're not. You can't introspect on what you're seeing to the point at which you can make it rational. And so that's why some of these abstract things are so attractive to people, or were so attractive to people, because they are they maintain a novelty experience longer than, say, a landscape would. So I'm just trying to get on design. So that's pattern recognition and the relationship between the patterns that extant in the mind of man and in the natural world, and describing some aspect of those patterns in a way that's associative for humans, but not rational for humans. This is important. You can introspect on the craft as the hand of man and the processes, as sort of like how men are very fascinated by machines. You can try to introspect on design. You can learn like what I have learned about it, which is I can express it, but that doesn't convey the experience of it. And then the third dimension is meaning. which is representation. And so representation is association. So you have these three categories of representation. In high art, it would be things that were provoke mythology and universal appeals and whatever. In the shit that's produced today, which is political art, it's just provoking some antagonism about the moment in order to grasp your attention. So, so if you have these three foundational categories, which is craftsmanship, which is materials, aesthetics, which is design, and meaning, which is associative content, you have the ability to judge the information density of each of those things. And think of it that's the evidence of the hand and mind of man in the particular thing. So the next one is so you've got 3 points here right on the ground, right? 1, 2, 3. The vertical between them is the representation of that particular piece in its civilization, in its period. In other words, art evolves through time. In its period, in its movement. So you can tell that work is an example of the period, the Mona Lisa, or the pyramids, the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, the evolution of the Kouros boy, which is the contrapposto stance in male statues, right? You can see that are these representative in other words, the symbolic excellence of a given movement in a given period in a given civilization. And so what you end up with is art converging on a canon of pieces that represent these civilizations, periods, and movements. And if you have that history, now you have the 3 axes of measurement and 1 axis of value, right? And that is pretty much how you. I mean, I can go into more detail, but those 4 dimensions are how you evaluate art. It is not hard to do that. The hard part is essentially meaning. In other words, when you think art is bad, it probably is. But when there is art you don't understand, that's different. So for some reason, if you're talking about high art, which is art has cultural meaning, a play, a novel, a movie, a painting, an etching, a sculpture, a piece of architecture, decoration that is applied to buildings or spaces, decoration that is applied to fabrics or walls, right? The decoration we wear on our bodies every day, right? It's just clothing, right? The signaling we use with decoration around us, even though we may not think of a car, is decoration that we use to express the meaning we have in our lives. They are. So when you have these 4 dimensions, you pretty much can, if you have an understanding of the meaning of the thing in its context, value it. Now, you might disagree with it. I don't like Byzantine art. I despise Islamic art. I think Hindu art is cute. I mean, they have basically everything in India is, I have no money, I have only cheap materials, I have very cheap tools, but how can I use content? In other words, how can I use detail to attribute to produce what would otherwise produced by German quality? In other words, or Japanese quality. German and Japanese quality is very precise, very deliberate, very high tool use, very high expertise use, especially very high materials use. Whereas in India, it's very cheap materials, very cheap tools, etc. But so you get those buses, you get the Cybertruck if you take the German model to one end, and you get the Hindu buses with all the crap
Oh
hanging,
yeah, I've seen them. In
right?
fact, I've seen them driving into parts of Tibet. There's
Yeah,
something about that part of the world where it's capital poor, and so
yeah,
people come up with creative ways to status signal.
exactly. So that's how you they are. They are. So, for example, the problem is you have to know a lot about different cultures. In other words, so your ability to judge a piece of art on its meaning, you can judge its craftsmanship, you can judge its aesthetics. It's very hard to judge its meaning. You can actually judge, you can actually determine by looking at a canon the what things are most representative of a movement, period, and a civilization. You can find that stuff out, but unless you know about the culture, it's very hard to understand what associations are being drawn. So this question is, I finally got enough so I can information out so I can can answer the question. Um, what determines whether an arc is valuable or not? The design and okay, what determines it? What determines what is good is different from what determines what is preferable, right? So art is good independent of your opinion because we can tell, we can measure it by the hierarchy of people that have determined by market competition what symbols or what representative pieces are the archetypal evidence of the movement, the period, and the civilization, right? That's a market phenomenon which produces it. And the market phenomenon is going to be, like many other cases, many other things, determined about the discriminatory power of the people who are interested in that stuff. So, I mean, you can look at photographic equipment because I know Francis is into that, right?
Look
There's some,
behind me.
yeah, exactly. So there's back in my day, you had a Hasselblad camera, you had a big dick, right? I mean, right, right. So which person is most capable, in other words, most knowledgeable in being able to assess the quality of a piece of camera equipment? Well, it's the same thing when you talk about a movement in art. You have to say, is this person capable of making this decision? Right? That's a true, right? You're going to have experts determine what is good in a movement, right? Even if some movements are bad, which I'm sure we could find a couple. Um, uh, there are, piss Christ, for example, and that kind of nonsense. It's not. It's attention whoring, right? It's not art, right? Uh, so if you don't know what piss Christ is, look it up on the internet.
I want to interject a little bit. So
Sure.
based on what I've heard so far, is it correct for me to essentially summarize saying the value of art at the time in the era of its creation is determined by whether the art represents a zeitgeist of that society at the time?
Yes, plus the technological innovations in
Hmm.
representation, technological innovations in aesthetic design, organization, composition,
But
and in craftsmanship. So we forget that art is a technology that evolves
yes.
over time, and so I'm trying not to obstruct that, but yes, it represents the use of technology to represent the zeitgeist of the time.
So then let's take the Piss Christ, for example. This might be a bad example, but would it not represent the age that we're in? This Piss Christ kind of age, and therefore, actually, you could say that it's not a piece of great art, but it's a piece of art that accurately represented it, the zeitgeist.
Okay, in art we call it editorial, and we separate editorial, which is critique, from art, which is inspiration. And
Hmm.
so, is that making you feel safer in the space? Is that
No,
making
it
it
makes me feel disgust.
Right, exactly. So that's the point. Thank you for bringing that up because I wouldn't have thought to cover that issue right off the top of my head.
Okay.
So that's correct. You are absolutely correct. It's not we call it editorial art, which is basically critique, which is basically complaining. It's not inspiring you to create a space in which there is inspiration to ask you to also seek truth, beauty, and excellence. That's right within the context of your domain. So, if you can, when that's so, like I have a naive friend who's hyper very wealthy, well educated, but culturally naive, and he and his wife like horse pictures. Now, okay. Now I see this as silly, but is it silly to them? No, it may not be good, but it's a preference. But it's a preference because that's how they want to decorate. That's the associations they want to decorate their house with, their home with, right? Um, a lot of Western art is tacky as fuck, right? But I mean, West like the cowboy shit and whatever, and you know, and there are many craftsmen who produce like little bronzes of lions and shit like that, right? Right. It's tacky as fuck, but it's a preferential art that's well crafted, and it's just sometimes very very well crafted, surprisingly. Um, but its meaning is the satisfaction of a preference, not a good.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're talking about a piece of art, and we usually call it high art. In other words, we distinguish uh, uh, student work and editorial work and and uh, and various other kinds of decorative expression from high art, and that high art is meant to provide you inspiration to also contribute to the commons by the production of truth, beauty, and excellence. But that's what makes art art. Now, I used to have this little Indian wooden box that I kept like my class ring in and wedding rings, gold braids, back when I wore gold chains because that I'm old enough to have
You're
done the.
like you're like the white version of Mr. T.
Yeah, yeah, no, I couldn't go that far, but there was a time in the '80s, like the Don Johnson period, where I had the diamond earring, right? I had the ponytail, and I had the gold
What?
chains. Oh, absolutely.
I need to see a picture of that.
I was, I was, I was rocking it, and I got I got lots of mileage out of that. Um, and I was paying, I was back when because I had the hair back then.
Mm-hmm.
I was paying, $70, which is a lot of money back then,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
to go to the hairdresser to have some fancy guy cut my hair so I look trendy. So, sorry, not throwing myself off. So I had this little wooden box. I just love those little hand carved. They come out of India usually. These little hand carved wooden boxes. They're just adorable, right? But is it art or is it high art? No, but it's quality craft, right? And it is a preferential craft. So, if you look, I'm sure I have a picture of this somewhere, but behind me I like line art, and that's my core competency in art. Is I had an etching of huge etching, 40 by 30 or 48 by 30.
Mm-hmm.
Behind me on the wall in the living room with I had two custom bookcases made in cherry, and then I had this etching on the wall. And every time I saw it, it made me happy. Well, it's basically a tree, right? I mean, it's a tree, and I view the oak tree as life, sort of thing. So in my tradition, it had a lot of meaning for me. So you decorate with what is representative to you and what makes you feel safe in the space. That's a difference though between the quality of the craftsmanship of that piece was phenomenal. I don't know what I paid for it. It wasn't too many thousands, right? It was was reasonable. Um, I think it cost like it was ridiculous framing it. It cost a fortune to frame it. And so you have that kind of piece, right? and that's an association for you. Now, would my piece would that piece that provoked that meaning for me provoke the same thing to my friend who likes pictures of horses or paintings of horses? No, right? But I understand that that person is being provoked by this. Is one higher art than the other? Yeah, really, but that doesn't matter, right? Because the depth of meaning in the oak tree and whatever in civilization is more than the depth of meaning in this is a pretty horse head too, because I do this. Um, but that is not yet high art, which is, yeah, but is this what's considered a monument? And so the absolute pinnacle of high art is monument, which is why everyone says that architecture is the highest art and everything else is meant to decorate it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, have I answered this? Art conveys blah 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 blah. What I can I've explained what determines it's valuable. In other words, good versus preferable. And how do we draw the line between meaningful and something that lasts? Well, I mean, I think I said that. Does it inspire you to the good, to contribute to the commons, which is the production of a safe space for man by the production of uh, truth, excellence, and beauty?
I have one last thing to add, and I think what you just said probably already answered it. So previously, I concluded that good art, inspirational art, captures the zeitgeist of the time.
Yeah.
Then throughout history, do we is it correct to say that the art, the great art that survives throughout history, not only captures the zeitgeist of the time, but also captures truth, beauty, and what was the three?
Excellent.
Excellence, and therefore conveys universal value in those things, and therefore we as human beings see them as high art.
Correct. It's absolutely correct. You also can just sell this. It's really this stupid. How much fucking money did it take to make that?
Yeah,
Right? I mean, that's really the
it's a sign of excess productivity, of
correct.
capacity
Yep.
to put something together that otherwise has no utilitarian value.
Right. So the pyramids are pretty fucking high art. Um, my the Parthenon is pretty fucking high art, even if it damn near bankrupted the
I mean,
Greek.
we have more recent examples of things that actually bankrupt the kingdoms. Look at Angkor Wat.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
And according to this, was it Song Dynasty traveler or is it some Ming Dynasty, some Chinese traveler who documented that thing at its height. So today we just see a bunch of, well,
Yeah,
some part of that greater town. So
yeah,
Angkor Wat is the most well known, but
mhm,
there's a much bigger structure around the Angkor Thom, which is essentially the town, or
yeah,
rather the city. And there are many overgrown, claimed by the jungle type of temples and architecture and so on, just in the surrounding kilometers of that site. But at its height, a Chinese traveler has documented that the tip of the temple were covered in gold and all kinds of jewels and so on. It's not just the carvings, but actually the place looked like it's a city, the golden city from the future. And that absolutely bankrupted the Khmer people,
yeah.
the Khmer kingdom. I think I don't exactly remember. I think they got conquered by Thailand or something like that.
Hmm. I don't remember who did it. I think it's Thailand.
I mean,
So yeah, but you started out asking a question. Anyway, so the last point I wanted to make was the ternary logic expression. So I said there's craft, aesthetics, and meaning, right? As the finest. There's truth, meaning, excellence, craft, beauty, design. In other words, why do we keep coming up with this? Right? That's why. Right? Is that artists to produce a nest, public artists to produce a nest for a people. The nest is the decoration of the nest is to get them to contribute to comments, to take pride in their comments as investment, and to increasingly invest together in the production of truth, beauty, and excellence that represents them and their successful achievements, because the economics of producing monuments is such that it takes a people, it takes community, it takes desire to produce some sort of truth, beauty, and excellence to make a place for them. And so, I view my point here is that that art is essentially art, like economy and technology or science is in fact a representative of the monuments produced by a people through time. All right, have we killed this one?
I think we killed that one. Well, I think this has got to be a record. An hour and 15 minutes in, we only answered 2 questions.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the truth is, though, I mean, I'd clip those 2 conversations out and say both of them are worth a watch.
There was one session where we answered 1 question.
Was there really?
Really?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, I gotta look through history. Because in the title I add how many questions we answered. Now you piqued my interest. Alright, so question 3.